In September 2018, Excel introduced dynamic array formulas. Before we learn about specific formulas and their use cases, let's discuss some basic stuff about them. So these formulas can spill into neighboring cells if the version of Excel you are using supports them. I'm using Microsoft 365 which supports dynamic array functions. If you do not have Microsoft 365, you can buy it from the Microsoft website or you can download a trial version. I will leave a link to it in the description. Now, for example, we wrote a formula sequence 10. The output was not restricted to the cell where we wrote the formula. Instead, it also filled the next 9 rows of the column A. These were the neighboring cells for A1, which is where we wrote our formula. Now, if we revisit the definition of dynamic array, it states that they can populate or spill into the neighboring blank cells. Let's say if one of these cells was not blank and instead it had a value 4, in that case, Excel will return a spill error, which in layman terms states that Excel is not able to populate the cells that the formula is trying to fill. There can be multiple reasons for this. We have already explored the first one. If the neighboring cells are not blank, we will get the spill error. Let's explore a couple of other possible reasons. For example, if Excel is not able to determine the size of our dynamic array, it will give us spill error. Here, when we wrote sequence 10, Excel knows it needs to populate the next 10 cells. But if we choose random between function with 10 and 90 as our parameter, inside the sequence function, it will run into the spill error, and this is because Excel does not know beforehand how many cells it needs to populate. Random between can return any value and that value will change frequently. Like here, we are entering a value in this cell and the value of our function is also changing. Excel won't be able to handle this part or our changing size. For now, let's delete this and we will talk about couple of other interesting things related to dynamic arrays. Notice this cell where we wrote our formula. It has the actual formula, but if you look at the rest of the cells, you will notice that the formula is grayed out. So if we have to make any changes to our formula, we will have to make the change at the first cell itself. Let's say we want to refer this range that got created using our dynamic array formula in these cells. Normally, if we want to refer any value from a cell, we can just write equal to and we can point to that cell. Now here, even though our cell A1 had the dynamic array formula, it only returned the value that is stored in that cell. If we want to return the values from the entire range, we can do that by using hash. We just have to select the cell that has our formula, and along with this cell reference, we have to write hash in the end, and now it is giving the entire range as output. This is a very important concept. If you just refer the cell containing the dynamic array formula, it returns the value from that cell, but if you add hash in the end, it returns the entire range. Now let's look at a very basic scenario to learn an interesting and important concept. Here we have a dataset with 5 rows and we want to calculate the product price on the basis of product ID. I have used the dynamic array function sequence to create our product ID. Now to get the price, we can use VLOOKUP. This will be our lookup value. For our lookup array, we will select the entire range. Since we will copy the formula to the other cells, we will have to make this range absolute. Let's do that. we want the third column, and we want false for an exact match. Now if we copy this formula down, we get the answer we were looking for. In this case, we had to write this formula and then we had to copy it to the other cells. If you notice closely, the only thing that is changing in this formula between these cells is our lookup value. Rest everything is the same. The lookup value was created by a dynamic array function. Is it possible to write this function just once and calculate our price for the entire range? We know if we add hash, Excel will spill the value of these cells here in this range. Will it work with VLOOKUP also? Let's try that. We will write VLOOKUP. Now instead of writing A2 as our lookup value, we will write A2 hash, which should suggest to Excel that we want to do a lookup for the entire range. We will select this range as our table array, similar to what we did earlier. And now we again select 3 and false. And surprisingly, we get the exact same result. Notice we did not have to copy the formula to the below cells. We did not have to make our range absolute. None of that. Excel understood that we were trying to implement VLOOKUP for the entire range of cells, and it understood that we wanted to consider this as our table array. We did not have to make it absolute. How cool and convenient is that? So our existing functions, when paired correctly with dynamic arrays, also become dynamic. This was a simple scenario. We will use this feature with more practical scenarios in our future videos of this section. Now, if we convert our dataset into a table, we will notice that all cells where we had used dynamic array formulas or their references will start giving errors. This is because Excel table does not support dynamic array formulas for now. Also, if our spill range is very huge, Excel may give us out of memory error, so we should be careful with using dynamic arrays for huge range of data. This was some basic stuff. Hopefully it boosted your understanding of dynamic array functions. We are going to learn some awesome dynamic array functions, and we will solve some tricky questions with ease using them. Stay tuned. By the end of this section, you will become an expert in using dynamic array functions in Excel.